Hello everyone, welcome to Azim Premji University's Seeking Sustainability series. This is a very special episode of ours in our series on nature writing for children because it's our 10th episode. And so it's a real pleasure to have taken this series through the past 9 episodes and now up to the 10th. I hope those of you listening have been able to catch our previous episodes. If not, please do look them up on the Azim Premji University's video channel, YouTube video channel. And you will see that we've had a number of very interesting speakers come in and talk to us about nature writing for children. You may remember that 2 months ago, Shobha Vishwanath, who was the co-founder of Karadi Tales, came and spoke to us about her journey with Karadi Tales, which is, of course, such a magnificent publishing company for children. Last month, we spoke to Binita Sen and Shekhar Mukherjee, and Shekhar Mukherjee talked a lot about how he uses illustrations to highlight the visual appeal of books. And today, of course, we have with us illustrator, supreme, I'd say, Rohan Chakravarty. And in India, it's been very hard to. Wildlife issues and conservation issues are so central, but it's been very hard to take them beyond certain niche groups which are interested in these issues and out to the larger public. And Rohan, because of his very keen knowledge of wildlife and conservation, as well as his fabulous capacity to do sketching and art, has really bridged both of these so well with all the work that he does, including things you see in the Midday, in the Hindu, in so many other things, and the several books he's done. And I'm very pleased to also have Ranjini Murali with us. He is a scientist at Conservation Foundation and the Snow Leopard Foundation, and the visiting faculty as well with Azim. So she will lead this conversation with Rohan. I do invite you to our past episodes of the Seeking Sustainability series and do write into us and buy Rohan's book. Most important. And I hand this over to you, Ranjini.
Thanks so much, Almi, for having us here today. And I'm so excited to be talking to you, Rohan. I'm a huge fan of your work. So I'm glad to be finally able to talk to you.
Thank
so
you.
I guess to start with, this is Rohan's new book. And this is your fourth, yes, on both sides. And this is your fourth book, right?
That's
so what makes this special compared to the other ones? And you must be so excited to have this out.
I'd first like to thank Harini for introducing me to the audience. I've been a huge fan of her work. I discovered her writing through Cities and Canopies, which is one of my favorite books, and it's really an honor for me to be introduced by a prolific author like her. It's also I'm also very grateful to Azim Premji University. It's an honor for me that a university has considered my book worthy of an hour-long discussion. I've had a love-hate relationship with education. I practically forged signatures to obtain my graduation degree, so you can imagine. So it's really an honor for me to have this platform to discuss my book in the first place. And thank you for that. And thank you, Ranjini, for agreeing to do this conversation. It means a lot for a scientist, a researcher, and an author like you to be a part of this conversation and analyze my work. So yeah, thanks so much. Why this has been a special book. Sorry, can you give me 1 second? Sorry about that. I think why this has been a different endeavor compared to the other books is because the process of curating is really boring for an artist who would rather create. And this book was more about curation and less about creation, because it's just a curated compilation of all that has been published in my columns in the last 8 to 10 years. But why it has been special is because the very idea for putting this book together began in 2012, when I think I was overtly ambitious. My portfolio was considerably short, and I thought that it would be a good time to approach publishers with this concept. Thankfully, the book got rejected several times over. I think 6 times back to back, and the way it has taken shape and form now, I don't think it would have back then. So I really thank all the publishers who rejected me back then, so that I could have this book 8 years later.
That's awesome. That's great to know. So thanks to all the publishers who rejected you before this. And I think a little bit before that, you just admitted to a crime for forging your signatures to get through your education. So yeah, hope nobody.
Right.
Can you tell me what?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I hope nobody who gave me my degree is listening to this. I'm sure they're not. So we are
Yeah.
safe.
So I really enjoyed reading this book. So I finished it
Thank you,
back to
Ranjini.
back. I completely enjoyed it. It starts out a little bit depressing, but then it picks up. And like I love how in the beginning you really pushed the readers to make them feel uncomfortable. I think throughout the first few pages of it, I felt like it was quite uncomfortable in that space to be reading that. And then after that, it's like a balm that's saying, no, it's okay. There's also
Right.
cuteness there. So I really enjoyed reading this book. Would you like to tell us a little bit about it before we dive into our discussion?
Sure. I've actually prepared a short presentation for those who are not familiar with the book to just do a quick introduction. So I'm just going to play it right now. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yeah, it's
All
visible.
right,
But
great. So the book is called Green Humor for a Graying Planet. Green Humor is the name of my series, and Graying Planet probably functions as a metaphor for so many things: the planet itself, my own graying hair, and the status of affairs. So I believe that a lot of what we ignore as mainstream information is very important, and our lives revolve directly around things like dragonflies, turtles, not just tigers and pandas, uh, and our lives revolve around these creatures a lot more directly than celebrities and politicians. But why these creatures do not get mainstream attention is because they cannot stage wardrobe malfunctions or controversies and make it to page one of the news, which is where creative communication around conservation comes in. And I always keep giving this hypothetical example of Mauritius. All right, where the year is 1600, the first European settlers are coming to the island, and the dodo is around, and good science communication is happening on this island, and people are telling these first Europeans about the importance of the dodo and the role of the dodo in their lives and what the dodo means to the ecosystem. So I believe that if such a system existed back then, the dodo would still be alive. The dodo would still be around us today. And what the lack of good creative science communication has done is not just wipe out this dodo, but also create new ones who think climate change is a Chinese hoax, and some of who are really too close for our own comfort. I'm just going to leave you to read a few of my cartoons that feature in the book, so that you all can figure out what the book really is about.
would you like to read it for us, Rohan? Dramatic
For
reading.
sure. So this is a cartoon about palm oil. We all know that palm oil has been wreaking havoc in Southeast Asia, and now it has made its way into India as well, in the Western Ghats and the Northeast. So here's a picture of orangutans burning a palm oil factory down with palm oil itself, saying, "Looks like we've discovered at least one good use of palm oil." This is, I think, self-explanatory. A lot of my book is gloom and doom, but I have taken the trouble to organize cartoons as a part of 10 or 11 chapters, and some chapters are fun. Some chapters deal with interesting trivia. Some chapters are about climate change and the conservation threats that various kinds of creatures face, and what these cartoons do is also take focus away from just the more charismatic and obvious megafauna, so to say, and shift the limelight to lesser known creatures as well, like frogs. A marine biologist preparing for a session says, "Good morning, everyone. I'm a marine biologist, and I welcome all of you to the Marine Environment Awareness Program. All set for your first activity." And what's the first activity? I'm going to shove plastic waste down your throats, and you'll tell me how it feels. The hopu, one of my favorite birds, introduces you to the section on birds, which is probably the longest section in the book, birds being my favorite subjects. There's also a chapter on insects, reptiles, and some interesting trivia about them. This one is about from a poster on the dung beetle. And then we go back to more complicated aspects of environmental governance and how environment and politics merge together, something that people really hate to read about but now are forced to. Here's one on the MOEFCC and how, unfortunately, it functions rather than how it should operate in a country like ours. And we end the book with a chapter on COVID and the kind of conservation implications and complications that coronavirus has brought in. The book is available on Amazon, Penguin, Midland Books, Kahani Tree Books, etc., among other bookstores that they also deliver online. And here are some places you can follow my work on the internet. All right, without taking much time, let's jump into our
Awesome. Thanks
conversation.
so
Ranjini.
much
Thanks.
for walking us through this, Rohan. You know,
Thank
one
you,
of my
Ranjini.
favorite comics from your book is this one. I don't know if people can see on the screen.
All
There's
right.
a polar bear, and here there's a polar bear in front of the fire, and he's like, "Are you not entertained?" When he's talking about the oil companies. And I love how in so many of your comics there's so many cross references. There's cross references to popular culture. There's cross references to social media. It makes it feel really relatable and also a bit layered. Like this, I'm guessing, is the reference to the Gladiator movie
Yes, absolutely.
where he says, "Are you not entertained?" And
Yes.
within that context as well, it's so layered because it's quite dark in the context that they say into the movie. So I absolutely love how you cross reference so many things and make nature communication fun, because very often it's like people think of it a little bit as serious or obsolete, but you make it very relevant and relatable through, like, using these kind of tools. So yeah, that's one of my favorite comics in your book.
Thank you,
So
Ranjini. I have this cartoon that says a frog is telling a taxonomist that taxonomy sounds all Latin to me. So I think that's something that scientists, well, most scientists I know, fail to achieve. A lot of science is restricted to scientific publications, which nobody really cares to open and read. So I think with my cartoons, I've always tried to extend a friendly handshake between my subjects and my readers, and I hope you know it is being achieved through this medium.
yeah, I think you've been doing a really good job with that. So because it feels accessible. So I guess we can dive into a conversation
Absolutely.
about looking at your comics in form. I'm just gonna share my screen so that we can walk through these. Sorry, just give me a minute. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So I guess to start with,
All right. I was referring to this cartoon.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
this is the one we're talking about. And I guess like we covered this, right? Like to talk about like like what kind of a form is cartoons and how does it work effectively when it comes to science and nature communication?
So here's the thing, Ranjani. I really don't know how effective it is because I still have a lot of scientists I know who think that cartoonists aren't really qualified to talk about science. So it does make me feel a little discouraged that way. But then I really enjoy what I do, and so I try to keep going ahead. But having said that, Ranjani, I think the science community by and large has really been responsive and appreciative of my work, and it is largely because of them that I also owe my increasing readership to. In fact, the first exhibition that I did was held in Bangalore, and it was because of scientists and ecologists and conservationists who throng Bangalore that the exhibition turned out to be a success, and I was able to pursue. The exhibition gave me the financial backing to pursue a career in cartooning and give up my day job, which was in animation. So I really owe the science community a lot as a cartoonist, and yeah, see over the years, that's something I've also tried to break out of, rather than just appealing to a certain community. making my cartoons more diverse, more inclusive, and speaking about things that I wasn't comfortable myself talking about, and which also resulted in me learning more and me appealing to a much broader audience rather than just the conservation circles.
Thanks, Rohan. And I guess I found it interesting in the beginning when you said that scientists felt that you were not qualified to talk about science. Some scientists, and I think it brings into context two points. Like, is science and are science and science communication the same thing? Like, should the same people be talking about both? Right? Because actually, science communication probably needs a different skill set to what scientists have. So circling back to that conversation again, then how would you get this information, research or whatever that you want to produce your communication? What is the kind of work that goes into producing your cartoons?
It's actually a mix of everything. It's been a very random approach, Ranjini, and often to the point of being very annoyingly random. It could result. A cartoon could result from a gecko falling over my head to me reading a science paper. So there are various sources of information that make their way into my cartoons. Of course, when I have actually witnessed a creature on a nature trail or on a bird walk, it results in a more personal and I think a more entertaining story as well.
Mhm.
But there have also been instances where I've never for example, there's a cartoon in my book about a gecko that was discovered in Madagascar.
Yeah,
I'm probably not likely to see this animal ever. With I have to rely on secondary information as well and make it as interesting as I can through my 4 or 5 panels. So it's a mix and match, not just of sources of influences, but also approaches. What
yeah.
approach do I take to convey something interesting about a certain creature to my audiences? And I think I always put out a cartoon to the world only after I have enjoyed it myself. So I think that's my thumb rule.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Rohan. And talking about, putting out your cartoons to the world, and since you've started having different forms of inspiration, how have your cartoons evolved since you've started, like, working on them and over time, and the kind of evolution of your style? Because I think your cartoons are really distinctive. If someone sees it, like it's a Green Humour Rohan Chakravarty cartoon. So how would you describe your form and your evolution of the form?
Thanks, Ranjini. That means a lot that my work is identifiable to you. I think arriving at a style is something that really takes a long time for an artist to figure out. And, inadvertently for everybody, it always begins by trying to imitate the people you have admired, the artists you have admired. So for me, a lot of artists have influenced my work. Beginning with Mark Perisi way back in 2010-11 when I had started out, I was a big fan of his series Of the Mark. And if you look closely at his work and the narwhal cartoon that's on the screen, you'll notice that the way I've drawn the eyes on the narwhals are just like the eyes on his characters. And over time you also realize that there is a fine line between copying and developing your own individuality. So that's something I've always been very conscious of, and I've always tried to keep that line distinct. So I've been in touch with Mark Perisi for a brief while, and he's been generous enough to give me constructive criticism on my work. Then I think we've all read Bill Watterson, and I think it needs a bit of maturity to figure out what Calvin and Hobbes is really about. So even though I had been reading Bill Watterson for a very long time, I think it only hit me what the philosophical meaning of Calvin and Hobbes was all about after I was probably in my 20s. And that's when Calvin and Hobbes really started to influence my work, my humor, and even the way I drew my characters, especially tigers. Gary Larson is somebody who's had a tremendous impact on me because I think he was one of the first artists I discovered who was not scared of using offensive humor. That's something I really strive for. I'm I'm more a sadist and less a cartoonist. I really derive pleasure from offending people through my work, and I think the more offensive my cartoons are, the more I enjoy them. So that's something I've learned from Gary Larson and his series The Far Side. And my one of my previous books called Bird Business was actually a tribute to my imaginary mentor, Gendy Tartakovsky. He's an animator. He's the brain behind Dexter's Lab and Samurai Jack, two of my favorite series. And I think he's the reason why I'm a cartoonist today, because I've really grown up watching all of his work. And yeah, the Bird Business was my chance to pay a small tribute to his drawing style.
Great, thanks, Rohan. And when we're talking about styles, right, like cartooning styles, cartooning is a very specific format where there's a whole range that you have to play with to communicate your message. You have images, sorry, you have images, you have text, even things like how you use your titles, right? So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you play around with these different elements in while creating your strips.
Sure, Ranjini. So I just like to get into the technicalities a little bit here. We all read cartoons and we call them by various names: cartoons, illustrations, comics. But thinking that they are interchangeable, but actually in the publishing world they are not. They actually mean very specific things. So when we say cartoons, gag cartoons or panel cartoons, they refer to a single image that may or may not have a caption, and which is humorous, of course. Then we have comic strips. Comic strips are actually a sequence of these images, right? And then there's the Sunday strip or the weekend strip, which is a much longer format of the comic strip. So I've been fortunate enough to have had all these platforms at my disposal as a cartoonist, because my career graph has been very different from the people I have idolized. They've been in the print, they've always had syndication, so they've had the privilege of doing one specific thing as part of their series. But I've gone through several rejections, and I also started cartooning at a time when the print media was dying out, and I've always aspired to be in the print. So the kind of columns I got had different spaces, different lengths. So I had to adapt my work according to them. So I've experimented with all these formats. So I started out with shorter cartoons, panels, and two panels for my first few columns. And then eventually, when I got weekend columns, I got a chance to expand my narrative, to tackle more complex issues, and to lengthen my stories and present it to an audience that, after that, I noticed that a lot more people started reading and engaging with my work, because I could explain to them in simple pictures much complex matters about ecology and conservation. So, for example, the cartoon about the threats that the palace's cat is facing in Ladakh, in all across the Trans Himalayas, is something that I could not have done in a single panel. So it also depends on the subject, how complex the issue that you want to communicate is. The vulture comic, for example, that you see in the second section of this slide, is wordless. You know what vultures do. We all know what vultures do. They're scavengers, and this really doesn't. Setting up this gag didn't really need me to write anything extra. But that's not the case with the Palace's cat, because fewer people know about it. Fewer people know about what a Palace's cat is in the first place and what threats it faces. Similarly, a panel cartoon is something a format that I can use to communicate a problem that I can speak about in one single picture. So I think cartooning is a very dynamic medium, and I feel very fortunate to have had the chance to experiment with this dynamism and include all of it in my work.
Thanks, Rohan. That's a lot of actually stuff that I didn't know about cartoons. That a lot of it is also, the medium in which you publish seems to also drive how cartoons are represented as well, which I
Absolutely.
actually which I actually didn't know about. So even like a follow-up question to that would probably be that if now, since print medium is changing and you're not probably restricted in some senses with the formats of print medium, would that be also impacting how how the cartoon in its form changes when it comes online in a form of like, the blogs, or does that impact it a little bit?
Ranjini, I think I have a confession to make here. I'm very old school that way, because I've idolized cartoonists who've been in the print medium. I
Yeah.
still aspire for a connection with the print medium. I know perfectly well that the print is dying. It's well on its way to a complete collapse, especially in our country. And also, the for a long time, the internet and the cartoonists didn't really know what to do with each other. There was no way for cartoonists to make money out of the internet. But now with individual patronage becoming a possibility through platforms like Patreon, it is pretty much something that is viable. A lot of younger cartoonists are making good use of it. I'm still not on Patreon because I still haven't figured out how to use it. But yes, eventually I will have to get on such platforms and adapt better to the web, which I don't think I do very well now. I have a grouse with the internet that the way social media functions these days for a lot of people who publish cartoons is that a lot of what they put out is governed by what people like, what people
Yeah.
agree with. The internet results in a lot of polarization of opinion, failing to understand nuances about certain issues, and the thing that I talk about is all gray. There's no black and white. There's very little for people to just pick that they like or pick that they dislike. It requires a reader to completely understand something that I'm speaking about. So I don't think the internet really is suited for my kind of work exclusively, which is why I'm still very hung up on the print medium. It of course needs me to break some molds of my own self and adapt better to the web.
Great. Thanks, Rohan. This is really a fascinating conversation, looking at print versus internet and how that can even influence the messages of your the comics, the messaging as well. Now, looking forward, like how do you even convey these messages? Like, what are the techniques? Because I've noticed in some of your comics, like we were discussing, you walk the reader through the issue, right? You take them by the hand and you're like, this is what you need to see. But in a lot of others, you leave a lot unsaid, right? And sometimes it's also referring to quite complex ecological concepts. And in these cases, you don't explain it that much. So, that dichotomy versus informing readers, making them think. How do you decide what you want to do with those, with a cartoon?
I think there are some issues, Ranjani, that need a bit of sensitivity on my part, and a bit of responsibility on my part as well, because I cannot assume every time that my reader is aware of everything that I am. And, that's where I feel that things need to be simplified. For
Yeah.
example, the issue of sustainability in food is something that even I am trying to grasp day in and day out. I'm learning more, and in a country like India, the concept of sustainability really varies from region to region, from community to community, and that is something that needs sensitive communication. You cannot take anything for granted on that front, like vegan Westerners do. So, that.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch, I know. So these are things that need simplified conversations. These are things that need you to walk hand in hand with your reader. But
Yeah.
there are some topics like climate change which are comparatively better understood, where I can get a little cocky, like the word Shashwat used for me.
Accused.
And yes, and see, it's also to take you back a bit in my career, Ranjini. I started off as an animator, and I was making video animation. And during that time, I realized that it is not a medium I prefer to communicate in, because I think this is just my personal opinion, that video is something that enforces an opinion on an audience, whereas when it's a more static medium like cartoons, it encourages the reader to form his or her own opinion. And that is what I really want to achieve with my medium. I don't really want to enforce my own opinion on my readers. I want them to think, I want them to Google what I'm drawing about after they're done reading my work, and find out more about it themselves. So that is what I'm really trying to achieve with Green Humor.
That's fascinating. And I think sustainability is always a very complex topic, and I think even people are studying it. It's so, like you were saying, there's so many different issues to it, right? Which I guess brings us back to one of these, like, your research process and sources and, where do you get your information from? I guess we kind of covered this a bit though.
Yes, we did. Yes,
Yeah, yeah. So maybe we can go to the next one.
sure.
This, of course, when I first asked you this, you said you had no rules, but you've already, I think, mentioned two rules during this conversation we've had. So I think, like, what are your rules as a cartoonist? What do you stick by, and what do you eventually get comfortable breaking?
The first rule, like they say, the first rule of Fight Club,
Yeah.
I think when I find myself making too many rules, my rule is to break all of them, and
Yeah.
I think that's really the fun of what the fun of cartooning is. You know, that the fewer rules there are, the more you enjoy your work. And yeah, an honest admission here, I do green humor because I enjoy it, and that's the primary reason for me doing green humor. Any awareness that results out of it, or any consciousness that results out of it, is merely a byproduct. I draw these cartoons because I enjoy them, and I think that's the first rule. I need to enjoy drawing what I'm drawing about. And I think that's where I'm really thankful for wildlife to come into my life, because I'm sure had I been drawing political cartoons for a living, I really wouldn't have gone too far ahead, because I like to draw things that are beautiful, and politicians just don't make the cut. So yeah, that's one. And I think yeah, the other rule is that I should approve of what I have put out. So one reason why I draw cartoons is because I have really bad memory. I have poor intelligence, in my opinion, and I use cartoons and art as a medium to retain and learn more. And that's what I would also like to extend to my reader. So if my cartoons can serve as a tool for you to retain some trivia, to apply it in your life, maybe at a later stage, whatever you find interesting, I think I would have done my job. So yeah, that's another rule that I go by.
Yeah. I've also learned quite a lot from your cartoons, like a lot of little trivia
Oh,
on.
please, you're a researcher, you possibly can't.
I researched snow leopards. That's a very specific animal. But there's so much to the animal kingdom, right? And there's so many different aspects to it. And I love how you cover all of that. And I really learned a lot from reading your cartoons as well.
Thank
And
you, Ranjit.
yeah. So, a lot of time we talk about successes, and especially now with your fourth book, this is a story of success. But on the way, there
The
are
money is yet to come, so I don't really know.
hope. Okay, that but maybe there's like book is still an aspiration. So money is one aspect of success,
No,
but there's
absolutely,
other
yes.
dimensions to it, right? So, but when we talk about successes, what we forget is along the way there's actually been a lot of setbacks. And you alluded to that a little bit when you're talking about your book being rejected 6 times.
Right.
Six, was it? Yeah. But
Six
could
times,
you
yes.
yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your failures and how you've, gotten over these ruts?
Well, I think my career in animation is something that really taught me to develop a very thick skin, because client feedback for an animator can be absolutely crushing, and that's something you get very used to. Animation also teaches you the ethics of a creative profession, being disciplined, being having a routine, meeting deadlines, what deadlines are in the creative profession, what contracts are, keeping your word in a contract, and more importantly, the specifics of editing, the specifics of meeting the demands of a particular clientele and a particular audience. That's something that animation taught me, and I'm really grateful to that medium. And that's also something that gives you more a skin to take criticism of all kinds, be it trolling these days that happens left, right, and center. Anybody with a smartphone is opinionated enough to be a troll today, and that's something that can really pull you down if you haven't experienced that kind of an atmosphere previously. So that's something that animation has prepared me for, and I'm really grateful for that. Speaking of publishing, it's a whole new ball game. When I set out to look for publishers, my first challenge was to get them to take green humor, the concept of green humor, seriously. And back then, I don't think people were paying much attention. But now it's both unfortunate and fortunate. Unfortunate for the planet, fortunate for me, that these issues are mainstream and they cannot be ignored anymore. And the mainstream media cannot possibly brush them under the carpet anymore. So I think that is what has really also changed publishers' outlook towards my work, and my cartoons are taken a little more seriously than they used to 8 or 10 years back. So naturally, I met with a lot of rejection back then, but at the same time, I don't think the book would have taken this form and shape had it not been for those initial rejections. Um, this process itself was quite a was quite an adventure because it I wanted a 1,000-page compilation, like Bill Watterson has. And again, that was overtly ambitious of me because that would have made this book very unaffordable, very difficult to produce. And my editor really had to knock a lot of sense into my head repeatedly over phone calls and discussions that this is not that what is possible. You have to restrict your work to 200 or 250 pages, and only then will you get published, sir. So that was something that was really difficult for me to accept initially. But
Yeah.
I'm really thankful to my editor for pulling that off and for giving me this book.
Thanks for sharing, Rohan. As a researcher myself, I think rejection is something that I'm intimately familiar with. But unlike you, I don't know if I've developed such a thick skin to, like, even withstand the trolls on Twitter. So that's still something that, I think is going to take a little more.
Spend more time with me, Ranjini.
Yeah, I've seen the kind of trolling you get. No, thank you. Okay. So, your work, like Harni has said, right, has been able to bridge and going beyond just talking to people, talking about conservation to people within the community. It has managed to bridge and go like across communities, go across the world, and it's really reached a lot of people. So, could you tell us, and I'm sure you must have heard back about the kind of impact that your work has had. So, do you think you could tell us a little bit about the impact that your work has had across the world?
Sure, Ranjini. You were referring to success, and well, I really don't measure success by money or the number of book sales, etc. I measure success by the tangible impacts that your work can have, and especially mine as somebody who's a creative communicator. So there have been very few instances of my work having tangible impacts, but even those few instances have been very special to me. One of these instances has been through the means of this particular comic strip that you are seeing on the screen. It's about a pygmy marmoset, the world's smallest monkey, which suffers heavily from pet trade. And a reader from Peru read this cartoon and wrote to me saying that he was considering buying this monkey, but refrained from doing so after reading it. And that was one instance where my work could actually save the life of a wild animal. And I realized and actually began to believe in the strength of this medium only after this episode, because there's the magic of all kinds of media coming together today. Me drawing a cartoon, sitting in India, publishing it in the USA, a reader from Peru reading it, amplifying it probably on social media. So it's a lot of things coming together, and rarely that spark works. I've also heard from a lot of readers, female readers especially. I drew something about eco-friendly products available for sanitary as sanitary products and for aiding menstruation. And a lot of female readers wrote to me saying that that particular comic strip helped them make the switch. I'm a man, I know nothing about menstruation, so that meant really something very special to me, that I could touch the lives of female readers. And there have been several instances, like a lot of tourists have visiting Southeast Asia have not sought for civet coffee after reading my work about how it is produced, how oppressive it is for the animal, the civet. So there have been a few of these instances, and I would really like to have more such impacts of my work in the future.
Thanks, Rohan. That must be really heartwarming, huh? Like to get an email from someone in Peru saying that you've touched
Absolutely,
their life. I think that's
absolutely.
really special. So thank you for sharing this. It's really it must be such a special feeling to get all these people writing in. So then, of course, this is what I'd asked you earlier. What is your favorite cartoon from the book and why?
This is the my favorite cartoon from the book. I'm actually very self-critical of most of what I draw, but this is one of the pieces that makes me laugh every time I revisit it. I think it's a very stupid cartoon, and it's very informative at the same time. Two things I really like personally. So it's about the Arctic tern that migrates from one pole to another, and it's just that fact is brought out in a very stupid gag where the Arctic tern is mimicking polar bears in the South Pole and penguins in the North Pole. So I think this is one of my favorite creatures to draw. Every time I end up drawing something about the Arctic tern, it ends up quite hilarious. So I'm really thankful for this creature to exist.
Yeah, yeah. I also find this really funny. I especially love the polar bear sitting there laughing.
Right.
I really like this as well. So, we have a lot of young people who are probably interested in becoming cartoonists and illustrators listening into this talk, right? So maybe we can go through a little bit about, say, for example, if you're a young person and you want to get established in this field, not necessarily young or whatever age you are, but you want to get
Yeah.
fully established in this field, how would someone go about doing that?
Well, have a home for your work other than social media. Because a lot of young artists, I think, don't take into account that their work should not be governed by the platform. It is the art that should govern the platform, and not vice versa. So a lot of what people put out on social media ends up, pandering to a certain taste of people on social media, and not really drawing what they believe in. I think that I really want that notion to change among young artists, and the more you do that, the better. So having a home outside of social media for your work means that you need to have a website and a web portfolio that you can, whenever you're writing to a publisher, you need to send that as a pitch. All right, if you send your Instagram channel or your Facebook channel, nobody's going to take you seriously, because there is no certainty about social media, especially in a country like India, where there are various rules and regulations governing freedom of expression, freedom of speech on a medium like social media. So Instagram may or may not exist tomorrow. Your page on Facebook may or may not exist tomorrow, but something that is more everlasting needs to be there. So that would be my advice to people who want to pitch to publishers as beginners or amateur cartoonists.
That, I find it really interesting that you mentioned this, especially because I follow a cartoonist called the Oatmeal. I don't know if you've heard of
Yes,
the
of
Oatmeal.
course, of course. Who hasn't?
And he has a very cute cartoon on wombats. I think sometimes he also does nature cartoons, which are interesting.
Right, right, right.
Recently, he said he used social media to grow, but now he want to go back on that because social media was also charging him a lot. So now he's
Right.
trying to just get everyone to his website and like sign up using RSS feeds, and so that they just get
I see.
notifications when new comics go up. So I find it interesting that he said not to rely on social media
Yeah.
because it seems like a lot of cartoonists seem to be moving away from that format because like you're saying, it restricts your audience and you become a slave, I guess, to what
And nobody
they're.
wants trolls in their lives, Ranjini. So,
Nobody wants trolls. Correct. Yeah. Cool. And then now going on this thing about establishing yourself, the other thing that I often, when I started off as a researcher, one of the things that I didn't realize that was really important were networks, right? But
right.
I think increasingly networks, at least in science, I think are extremely crucial to getting opportunities, all of that, right? Like even knowing about opportunities, knowing who to go to. So as a cartoonist, I imagine that networks are also important. And how would you go about, like, establishing these networks or creating networks in this field?
Well, I don't think I'm very good at networking, Ranjini. I'm a recluse and an introvert, and I don't really actively seek human companion in the first human company in the first place. So I'm by nature I'm very bad at networking, but I've been lucky enough for networks to have worked out for me without me having to do much other than put out my art for people to read on a slightly disciplined basis. I think I'll be honest with you, and that's something I've been true to. All right,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of my networks have resulted because of that. So I think a disadvantage for me for choosing to draw a niche is that I'm an outsider wherever I go. In the cartooning world, I'm looked at as somebody who does not draw politics, does not draw the conventional stuff. So I'm an outsider in the cartooning world. In the science world, I'm an artist. So I'm
Yeah.
an outsider by default. So I've had this an outsider connection to several worlds,
Yeah.
and all kinds of people have been kind and receptive to me. So I think I'm very very lucky on that front. My brother is an ecologist, so by having him for a brother, he studies bats, by the way. By having him for a brother, I know a lot of the science and the conservation world. My wife is a climate scientist, and through her, I know a lot of people who work in that sector. So that's really good luck for me that such alliances have been forged. But yeah, I really I really value the kind of networks that I have had the fortune to develop, and I think networking is a very good part of, very important part of publishing, uh, and having new platforms at your disposal.
Yeah. So I guess for a cartoon, I mean, for a person interested into getting into science communication, I think what you're
Right,
saying is you actually need two all kinds of networks as well. One with the science community to
right,
understand the research, as you're saying, and the other with the world of cartooning. So you need to like kind
right,
of
right.
both of these in some ways
See,
and work.
cartooning is also a kind of journalism. I know a lot of people don't look at it that way, but my own editor says that, so I'd better take that seriously. So it also, needs you to know the world of news a little better than most people do. The world of newspapers, how media houses function,
Yeah.
what a newsroom is like, what people tomorrow are going to expect,
Mhm.
having that foresight. So it really needs that kind of a vision, which is not very difficult to develop if you are consistent with your work and the research behind your work as well. And
Yeah.
of course, by research I also mean engaging with people who know about these matters more than you do. So for
Mhm.
for me, I've actively sought for the opinions of scientists, of conservationists, prior to what I'm drawing or approaching any of my subjects. So that has also helped me build certain networks out of having those communications around my work.
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. And actually, I also had another quick question about, like, when you said when you first started out, you went about hosting an exhibition
Right.
in a gallery. So how
Yes.
does, like, as a young artist, if they have a body of work that they want to showcase, because how do they go about doing something like that?
Well, I don't know what the right process for that is, but how I went about it is make a small investment in hosting an exhibition. I did it all by myself. So I printed everything out. I put it up. I hired the gallery uh, for a good 2 weeks. So I think it takes a bit of taking a risk and believing in taking that risk. So thankfully, the first exhibition was a success. I followed it up immediately with two exhibitions, which were complete duds. I
Hmm.
lost whatever I earned in my first exhibition, the next two. But by that time, thankfully, I had a few columns running, so I had something to fall back on.
Yeah.
So of course, you also need to know your audience. My first exhibition was in Bangalore, and I knew that a lot of people were going to turn up because it was then my hometown. I knew some of the circles very well. There was a large number of wildlife enthusiasts and scientists in the city.
Yeah.
My next two exhibitions were in Hyderabad, which is
Mhm.
a sleepier city compared to Bangalore. Not many people turn up for events like these. I overestimated based on the Bangalore response, and I think you really need to know your audience before you plan something like this.
Okay. So
Yeah,
calculated risks is
yeah,
what
absolutely.
you're looking
Yeah,
for.
I've learned it the hard way.
Yeah, nothing like a big hole, like lots of money to get that lesson home. So the last question that I have is, where do you think, so as a young or anyone starting out, where can they learn to be a cartoonist? What are the resources that can help them improve their skills?
um, there's a lot of literature available these days for cartooning,
Mhm.
and people who want to be cartoonists. A lot of cartoonists now conduct workshops of their own on platforms like Skillshare, platforms like Domestika. They have some really good courses. I've never attended one of those. I'm a book person. I read a lot of books. When I started out, I was fortunate that Sherm Cohen, who was the storyboard artist for SpongeBob SquarePants, was doing his own tutorials, and he used to put out a lot of tutorials on YouTube for free, which is
Okay.
where I learned a lot of whatever I knew about animation. And it's because of a career in animation that I knew I had the necessary skills to be a cartoonist, because a lot of the art that goes behind both these mediums is more or less the same, character design, pre-production, storyboards,
Mhm.
framing, etc. So I think for me, it would be a very difficult thing to accomplish a career in cartoons had I not been an animator. So I've I've practically carried that skill set from one career to another. So yeah, so things turned out that way for me. But it really does not have to be such a long journey for artists today. There are plenty of resources available online. There are some great books too. I think Christopher Hart is one who's done a lot of books on cartooning. There are so many others. Steve. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name. But there are several books as well about how to draw comic strips. What the rules are behind creating comic strips that are available easily online.
Great, thanks, Rohan. And I think you'd also mentioned you also run a course, right? That people can join.
I actually have a workshop online, so which is free for anybody to access. I'll just share a link with you here, which maybe you could
Make
put out
sure-
on chat somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Hold on.
So if people want to
Yeah,
know,
I'll.
they can
Yeah, so the
access that.
link to my workshop is right here on chat, and if somebody could put this out on the chat window, that'll be great.
Yeah. And I guess the last question, do you have any new other work coming up, forthcoming
Yes, I
work?
do. I'm actually. Uh, I have a book coming out, hopefully before the year ends, and that's something I've really invested a lot of time, effort, and my entire being into. And it's something that's really close to my heart. It's a series of detective stories based in
Oh,
nature
wow.
as comics, and my protagonist is a mongoose who thinks he's a detective, and whatever he observes, he treats it as a crime scene, goes about solving it. So it's sort of designed to inspire a little bit of analytical thinking and problem solving while you are interacting with the natural world. So, and that's something that even I developed a sense of when I started exploring my own backyard, during the COVID lockdown, and I ended up learning so much more about it rather than going to Arunachal and seeing birds
Yeah,
on field trips. The very importance of knowing what's around you rather than chasing something exotic is
yeah.
something that I'd really like to cultivate in my audience by means of this book. So I'm really excited about this project, and it's a little early for me to delve into more details because it's still in the process of editing. But that's one upcoming project that I'm really excited about. Other than that, I also have a few exciting illustrations lined up for WWF and Save Our Seas for this year.
Wow, looking forward to those, Rohan. Your book
Thanks,
sounds super
Ranjini.
interesting. I can't
Thank you. I
wait.
hope so.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because a lot of actually even being a researcher is about that process of asking questions, of like finding the answers. It's like
Right.
a puzzle that kind of slots in, right? Like how do you understand the natural world? There are all these like different puzzles that kind of start slotting in to give you a picture. I think
Ranjini, I once wanted to be a researcher, but I realized later that I don't have the patience for it. So it's also my own way of living that life a little bit through my characters.
yeah, I can't wait to read that, and I'm sure like a lot of other people must be looking forward to it as well.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is where you can find the book for everyone watching and listening in. Green Humour is available on Amazon, Flipkart, Kahani Tree, Bookshop, and probably bookstores close to you as well. Will that be?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So all
At least in
local.
all big cities.
Okay, in all big
Yeah,
cities, all bookstores close to you.
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
guess with that we can go on to the audience questions,
Sure.
right? So oh wow, already there's a lot coming in. So, okay, I'm gonna read the first one. So,
Sure.
someone saying they're really fond of your cartoons and comic strips. So, big fan there. I need some tips on how to make some. Like, can I create sketches of people? But I also need to learn how to make cartoons of people. Can you please give me some tips?
Well, cartooning is all about breaking your characters down into simple shapes and creating your own characters, expressions. One of the most important preliminary lessons in cartooning is to watch yourself in the mirror and learn to draw expressions. I remember my mother was completely spooked out when I started doing it, thinking I'm crazy, and that's a phase that every aspiring cartoonist has to go through. So it is a lot of learning, it is a lot of practice, and I think if you go through my workshop, you will get a feel of what the process of cartooning is like, and I think that would be a very good introductory step into the world of cartooning.
Great. Okay, another one already. This is from Kailash. He's asked, as someone who's been studying, researching visual culture, it certainly has an impact, Rohan. So I think that's a comment.
Oh, that's not a question. Thank you, Kailash. Thanks for that.
Yeah. And then, so someone else has a question. Can comic strips be created on any topic? Because I found myself writing a conversation. I found myself writing a conversation between a booger and a sugar cane.
That's a very exclusive niche, I would say. But yes, if you want to draw a cartoon about anything, you can. I mean, I could draw a cartoon about me and Ranjini doing this session right now. So yeah, whatever you find amusing.
Yeah, so the world is your oyster.
Absolutely.
So go ahead with the booger cartoon. I think that's what we're waiting for. So there's another question from Vijeta. Where do you get your inspiration from? Where do you get all the ideas and facts?
Ranjini and I did speak about this earlier. Like I said, it's a I keep saying this, inspiration is like a gecko on the wall. You never know when it's going to fall onto your lap. So, as a cartoonist, you really have to be on your toes for that moment to strike. Even though you're reading a lot, even though you're observing a lot, it's not something that just comes naturally. You have to think. And for me, the golden hours of the morning are really productive when the rest of the world is asleep. Thankfully, I have two pets who wake me up at that hour and get me to work. So yeah, the morning hours are reserved for the ideation, the conceptualization, and it's a mix of so many things: reading, actually observing the creatures that I draw about, and understanding more about them.
Awesome. So there's a question that Shashwat had, which I think is interesting. So he asked, you spoke about trolls and how it
Yeah.
negatively, how does negativity and criticism impact you? How do you deal with it? And he's very interested to know what is the worst trolling that you can recall.
Wow. Okay. So I'm somebody who's had a lot of issues with anger management in my early life, and even as a teenager and while growing up. So I think trolling. I'm very thankful to trolls for teaching me to do that in a much better way, and actually teaching me to channel that into something productive, which is my art. So thank you for all my trolls attending this session. Uh, yeah. So the worst trolling that I may have received. See, I don't know if. A lot of female cartoonists who have the courage to put out what they believe in on the internet receive much worse trolling than a male cartoonist can, or any male person on social media can. So I really respect them for continuing to do what they do, because trolling in the context of females is a lot more personal, is a lot more vicious, and you know how bad it gets. So I think men have it really easy, so I won't complain.
Great, thanks, Rohan. Okay, another one from Dinesh Chaturvedi. What is the font that you use in your tools? Have you
Wow.
created?
There is no font. I write everything with my hand. So
Oh, really?
yeah,
Oh, this is your handwriting then.
yes, it is my handwriting.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay, and then you scan it, like, and how do you put it back?
Oh no, I actually write it freehand on the graphics tablet, which gets
Oh,
translated into art, digital art. Right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's not
Okay,
typed, is what I mean to say.
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think the questions are done
Oh, great. Okay.
from the audience, and I think it's right on time because it's like six. Oh wait, one
Fabulous.
more question, right
Sure.
on the nick of time. So okay, so somebody's asking on what device or platform can I practice all these? I mean, I've tried with paper and pencil, but drawing the same background again and again, it's really difficult. Can
Right.
you suggest something for Android?
If you're a beginner, please do not touch Android or any digital device. Please practice on paper as much as you can, at least for the first 5 or 6 years of your of trying to be a cartoonist, and only then touch a device. If you have enough experience, I would say start off with an open source software like GIMP or any other open source software that's available online for to learn digital inking and coloring. Later, when you have the means, get Adobe Photoshop or any iPad application that's popular these days. I don't know which one is. It's called Procreate. Yes, a lot of young artists draw on Procreate. I'm not familiar with that medium. Most of my work is done on Adobe Photoshop using a Wacom tablet.
Thanks. I'm sure a lot of people find that useful. Okay, we have many more actually coming up.
Oh, great. All right.
Yeah. So, how do you conceptualize? This is from Firi Rahman. How do
Yeah.
you conceptualize a storyboard that is more impactful and playful while focusing on the subject or the context? Uh, what
Okay.
what is your home before you start a sketch?
Um, so this is something I've learned again as an animator. The rhythm of editing. Editing teaches you uh, a certain timing in reading what you've written, and when to place your punchline, when to place your gag, when to take a break, when to let your audience take a break from reading what you've written. So
Yeah,
visual pauses, how you frame your subject, and when to introduce a pause, when to introduce uh, a barrage of text. That's something that a certain knowledge of editing teaches you. So if you're struggling with storyboards, I would really urge you to watch a lot of cinema, watch as much cinema as you can, because ultimately, what inspires you as an artist will never be one single form of art. It'll be a mix of various kinds of art forms that you enjoy. For me, it's listening to music, watching a lot of cinema from around the world, which is something I explore actively and religiously. And even reading books, reading humor gives you a sense of what really a punchline is, and where to place it, and how to really knock your audience out. So that's something you learn over time, and with reading and exploring various kinds of mediums of art.
yeah, that's an interesting thought also. Like one of the things I also liked about how you placed your punchline is one of these cartoons. I think they're talking about the IUCN Red List, and they're talking about like mating so that they don't
Ah,
get
yes.
endangered. And the punchline doesn't come from the main characters in the cartoon, but it
Right.
comes from two of them right at the back, like some two
Right.
insignificant characters, and they're like, "Oh yeah, but where are you? Where are we on the IUCN Red List?"
Right.
So I
Right. Right.
found that placing also really fascinating in that script.
To tell you
So
the truth, Ranjini, is something that you commonly observe in Woody Allen films. There is a primary conversation going on, and there are a few background characters, and quite often, the humor in a particular scene is coming from somebody who's completely irrelevant to the story.
yeah,
So I know Woody Allen is a very controversial figure to even name on a public platform. I know of his wrongdoings, but I
yeah.
have I have explored a lot of his work, and I really enjoy his comedies, and they've kind of shaped the way I put out my humor as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks for walking us through that, Rohan. Okay, so there's this another question that we have for you from Shashwat. What are
Sure.
the changes in your lifestyle that have come due to cartooning? Like, have you gone vegetarian? Have you like hate plastic? Things like that. So basically, I guess it's a mix of
How
cartooning as
much I
well as.
practice what I preach, right?
Exactly, exactly. Now that you are preaching on a very big pulpit.
Well, so the last cartoon in my book is actually a pot shot at my own self, because I've been making fun of people, I've been making fun of animals, of governments for 11 years, and I really wanted to turn the tables on me, and I think my book offered the perfect opportunity. So yes, I am a hypocrite, I will admit, but I'm also consciously cutting out a lot of whatever harmful practices that I have indulged in, like plastics. I have cut down drastically. I actively recycle. I actively reduce, and I also turn a lot of junk in my house into sparrow boxes. And
Mhm.
a lot of these sparrow boxes that I put up all around my house are actually uh, have been occupied by sparrows for the last 4 or 5 years, and they've been putting out baby sparrows into the world. So I feel a bit nice about that. Seafood is something that I've all but given up, and I think, especially in India, it is sourced very unsustainably, and a lot of policy really needs to change about how we obtain our seafood. So the few times that I have had seafood in the last many years has only been in coastal areas, and where when I am sure that I'm securing what I'm eating from a more from a small scale source rather than an industrial one. So seafood is something that I've all but given up on. And yeah, I think slowly and steadily I will turn a lot more green as a consumer than I am today.
Yeah, and I guess the flip side of being green is also it's a little more expensive sometimes. Like to be
Yes,
watching those labels.
that's
That
right.
also being said, when you're talking about seafood, there's an initiative called Know Your Fish,
Yes, of
which
course.
for the viewers who are interested, that kind of tells you about. which season you can eat what fish, because based on the breeding, based on how it's being caught. So if you want to move, if you're not as strong as Rohan to give up fish, but you want to move towards greener choices, that's one option that you have of, like, trying to read up a little bit about what you want to eat.
Also in season fish for that matter, which is
Yeah, yeah, right. In
which
season fish.
also puts out recipes
Hmm.
for fish that are in season, and it's also run by a very accomplished scientist called Divya Karnal.
Yeah, so in season fish as well. So both you can check both of these out to inform your seafood choices with tasty
Absolutely.
recipes as well. So yeah, I guess we're come to the end of our questions. Maybe we'll give it a minute to see if there are any last burning questions that people have. In the meantime, I have a question for you while we
Sure.
wait for someone else coming in. Is, in this time, in the time of COVID, you have managed to publish two books, which is really, really impressive. So, how have you managed to keep motivated, and how have you managed to find the space? Because I know motivation is something that a lot of people are struggling with at this time, right? So, how have you managed to be productive at this time?
I won't really call it being productive, Ranjini, because why I could focus on my books was because I lost out a lot of work because of COVID and the lockdowns. Work that needed me to travel, undertake field visits for various maps that I was committed to do for forest departments and certain NGOs, which could not happen. So
Mhm.
that gave me an excuse to focus on personal work that I had been putting off for many years now. So I think some part of COVID did come as a blessing for me, and for me to take this chance to focus on personal projects. So I don't think it was really motivation in the first place, rather than just changing the way I approach my art.
Yeah.
But yes, I do understand what when you say that being motivated through this time is very difficult for people, and I
Mhm.
think one of the primary sources of motivation for me is the fact that COVID itself is linked to environmental destruction, bad governance, bad policy, and these are issues that needed to be communicated on a much larger scale during COVID itself. So issues like the draft TIA, which were being formulated and released during COVID when people could not gather to protest, was something that really prompted me and others like me to put out more art on these matters and communicate complex issues, legal issues around the environment better to the world. So I think that's really what has kept me going. A bad government in India.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's a strong motivation, our own survival and our own wanting to create. So thanks for sharing all of this with us, Rohan. So I think we've come to the end of our audience questions. And thank you all so much for tuning in and for listening. And Rohan, thank you so much for answering all these questions and for walking us through your work and for giving us a little bit sneak peek behind the magician's curtain in a sense. So
too
thanks so
too too
much.
much of praise for me to accept, Ranjini. I must thank you for saving my face and maintaining a seamless conversation for the last 1 hour, which is something I would really fail to do had it been left to myself. So thanks for that, Ranjini.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. And before we conclude, another plug for the book.
All right.
Remember, go get it where you can, and in a local bookstore near you also, if it's possible.
Preferably over Amazon, please.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, and this has been great. And big thank you to Halmi and Shashwat as well for organizing this. Right. So yeah. Bye and
Thanks,
have a good
everyone.
weekend.